I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't anything that strange, not on its own anyway, just a little black feather. But the more I found them, the more I began to wonder what the hell was going on. It all started about a month ago. I was just getting up in the morning, like I always do, stumbling out of bed, bleary-eyed, trying to shake off the sleep. I've never been a morning person, so the first few minutes of consciousness are always a blur. I reached over to pull back the covers, and there it was, a single dark feather lying right on my sheets. I froze. I thought maybe it had fallen from a pillow or something. Maybe I had brushed against something in the night, but when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't just any feather. It was too dark, almost black, and the texture was wrong. It didn't belong to any bird I'd seen before. Not that I was an expert on feathers, but it was off. I figured it was a weird coincidence. Maybe the wind had blown it in through the window or something. I've got an old apartment, drafty, creaky, and the place sometimes feels like it's constantly moving. So I just tossed it aside, went about my day, and didn't think about it again. But then it happened again. The next morning, I found another one, right on the edge of my pillow. Same color, same strange texture. I felt a chill that I couldn't quite explain. I wasn't superstitious, but something about this didn't sit right with me. I shook it off though. I mean, I had to. It didn't make sense for it to be anything sinister. I was just being paranoid, right? That's what I told myself. But then the next morning, and the next, the feathers kept showing up. Every morning, without fail, there was another black feather in my bed. By the fourth day, I was starting to get seriously freaked out. I started to wonder if maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe it was just some odd coincidence. Or maybe I was sleepwalking, dragging something into bed with me and not remembering it. But when I started checking the locks on my windows every night before I went to sleep, I realized something. The windows weren't the problem. The feathers were still appearing, even though I had locked every single one of them. One night, after I found yet another feather, I decided to look around my apartment more closely. I moved the furniture, checked behind my bookshelves, under my bed. Nothing. There was no trace of anything that could explain it. It was like these feathers were just appearing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I know, everyone says that when they get freaked out by something, but this was different. I could almost feel someone standing in the room with me. I get the sense that there was someone just out of view, like they were right behind me, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Just the same dark apartment, the same empty silence. The strangest thing was, I started hearing noises at night. Small, almost imperceptible things. A soft scratching, like something was moving around just out of reach. I'd get up, try to track down the source, but it was always gone by the time I checked. And the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. That's when I started talking to my friend, Matt. He was the kind of guy who didn't take anything seriously, always cracking jokes and brushing things off. But I needed someone to talk to, so I called him one night. Man, I don't know what's going on. I keep finding these weird black feathers in my bed, and I'm hearing things at night. What do you think it means? He laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh I was expecting. It wasn't like he was mocking me. He sounded uneasy. Jude, are you sure you're just not imagining things? Black feathers? That sounds like something out of a horror movie, not real life. I knew he was joking, but there was something about the way he said it that didn't sit right with me. I let the conversation go, but the whole thing stuck with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening that I wasn't understanding. And that's when I noticed something else. As the days passed, the feathers were getting closer to me. They started showing up in the most personal places, in the folds of my clothes, inside my shoes, under my pillow. It was like whatever was leaving them behind wanted to get my attention. But for what? One night, after another uneventful search through my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the latest feather, wondering what the hell was going on. I could feel a presence in the room, and this time it wasn't just in my head. I swear I could hear breathing, slow and steady, right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, but I could feel something moving. Then a soft whisper, barely audible, brushed against my ear. "You shouldn't have looked." I jumped up, spinning around, but nothing. I swear that night I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning there was another black feather, and that's when I knew something was wrong. Something was in my apartment with me, something that didn't want me to figure it out. At first I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. I mean, come on, hearing things in the dark. It's what everyone does when they get freaked out. But those feathers, they kept appearing. I couldn't ignore that. And now there was something else, something darker, hovering just out of reach. It wasn't just the feathers anymore. It was the feeling that something was watching me, even when I wasn't in the room. I couldn't get any sleep. Every night I kept my lights on, thinking it would help, but the shadows seemed to stretch longer, to curl deeper. They watched. The moment I closed my eyes, I felt it, like the air itself was thick with something heavy. One night I finally reached my breaking point. I called Matt again, even though I wasn't sure if he could help. I needed to tell someone about what was going on. If nothing else, maybe I could find some reassurance, something to calm my nerves. He'd been the one to dismiss everything at first, so I hoped he could at least offer some explanation that would make sense. "Matt," I said when he picked up. My voice cracked just slightly. "I need you to come over. I'm losing my mind here." "Jude, what's going on? You sound freaked." "I am freaked," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. "Something's in my apartment, something I can't explain. I don't know how to say this, but it's leaving feathers. Black feathers, in my bed, all over the place, every morning. And last night, I heard someone breathing right behind me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a quiet, uncomfortable pause that stretched on longer than I expected. Finally, Matt spoke. "That's messed up, man. I mean, I didn't think you were serious about the feathers, but breathing. That's not normal." "No kidding," I muttered. "That's why I need you to come over. I need to figure out what the hell is going on before I lose it. I'll be there in an hour." That hour felt like it lasted an eternity. I stayed on the phone with Matt, pacing the apartment, checking the locks again, my eyes constantly flicking back toward the corner of the room where I felt that presence. The air felt heavier. It wasn't just the weight of anxiety anymore. It was something else. Something cold, something that didn't belong. When Matt arrived, he was trying to keep the mood light, but I could tell he was a little uneasy. He walked in with that cocky grin he always wore, like nothing ever fazed him, but even he couldn't completely mask the nervous tension in his shoulders. "All right, man. Show me what you've got," he said, rubbing his hands together like he was preparing for a joke. I led him to my bedroom, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps. I pointed to the bed. The sheets were still messed up from the night before, but the place where I had found the feathers was empty. "There, right there, you see it, don't you?" Matt squinted at the sheets, then shrugged. "I don't see anything." "You don't see it?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. I felt my pulse quicken. "It's right there. There was another one this morning, just like the others." Matt stepped closer to the bed, his eyes narrowing. He reached down, lifted the edge of the comforter, and looked underneath. "No feathers, man. I don't know what you're talking about." I was about to snap at him, but before I could say anything, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. a gentle scrape across the floor. I turned. My gaze shot to the corner of the room. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Matt looked at me, clearly trying to stay calm. No. What? You're hearing stuff now too." I stepped toward the corner, my eyes scanning the darkness. I reached for the light switch on the wall and flicked it on, flooding the room with harsh brightness. Nothing, just the empty, quiet space I'd been in all along. "You did hear that," I muttered under my breath. "Something's in here, something that doesn't want to leave." Matt exhaled sharply, now clearly uncomfortable. Okay, maybe I've been brushing this off too much. But it's not like there's some creature in your room or whatever, right?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. It was like I was standing at the edge of something too big to understand, something that wouldn't make sense no matter how hard I tried to explain it. Matt seemed to realize that too. He stepped back from the bed and looked around, his eyes darting from corner to corner. He finally sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, I think you need some sleep. Seriously, you're not thinking straight." I was about to argue, but I stopped myself. The last thing I wanted was for him to think I was crazy. But then it happened. Just as I was turning toward him to speak, I caught it out of the corner of my eye. A glimmer of black. Another feather. This time it was lying on the floor right in front of the closet door. It hadn't been there a second ago. I reached down slowly, picked it up, and held it out in front of Matt. His eyes widened, and he took a step back. "Where did that come from?" he asked, his voice suddenly tight. "I told you," I said, my own voice a little shaky now. "It's not just me. Something is in here, and it wants me to notice." Suddenly, the air in the room grew cold, a chill that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt the weight of it pressing against me, like the room itself was closing in. "I've had enough of this," Matt muttered, stepping toward the door. "I'm not sticking around for this creepy nonsense." I didn't try to stop him. I didn't have the energy to. As he walked out the door, I was left standing there, the black feather in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Something had just crossed the line. It was no longer just feathers showing up. It was something else, something I couldn't explain. And whatever it wasn't finished with me yet. The next morning, I woke up with that familiar sinking feeling. The kind that grabs you when you know something's wrong, but you can't quite place what it is. My first instinct was to check the bed, check for another feather. But something was different this time. I didn't find just one. I found 3. They were arranged in a neat little row across the middle of the bed, perfectly placed, like someone had laid them there deliberately. I almost didn't want to touch them. Almost. But I had to. There was no ignoring this anymore. I picked up the first feather. It felt colder than the others, almost unnatural, like it had been sitting in ice. I couldn't stop myself from running my fingers over it, feeling the strange, smooth texture. And then I did something I instantly regretted. I held it up to my nose, inhaling deeply, as though the smell would tell me something. But there was nothing, just an overwhelming, musty scent. The air in the room seemed to shift, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. That's when I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't loud, but it was there. A quiet, rasping voice that seemed to slither through the air like smoke. "You shouldn't have touched it." I dropped the feather, backing away as the words sank in. That voice, I knew it wasn't in my head. It had been too clear, too real. I stood there, frozen for a moment, as if expecting something to happen. But nothing did. The room was still. The air felt thick, suffocating. I glanced around, but there was no one. Just the same empty room I'd woken up in every morning for the past few weeks. I couldn't stay there, not like this. I grabbed my phone and texted Matt. asking if he could come over again. I needed someone to help me make sense of what was happening. I was too scared to be alone anymore. It didn't take long for him to respond, though his reply wasn't what I expected. "I can't come over today, not after what I saw last night. I'm not going near your place anymore, Jude. You need to figure this out on your own." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I tried to text back, asking what he meant, but he didn't respond. Not even after I sent a few more desperate messages. It was like he had vanished, cut off completely. I didn't know what to do. I had nobody left. Nobody who could help me understand what was happening. And to be honest, I was starting to doubt if anyone could help. This was beyond my comprehension. Something far darker was at play, and it wasn't interested in being understood. By the time nightfall came, the silence in the apartment was unbearable. I had tried everything I could think of to stop the whispers, the footsteps, the strange chill in the air. I even thought about leaving the apartment, but where would I go? The thought of running only made me feel more trapped. That night, the air was thicker than ever. It pressed against my skin, suffocating. I could feel it wrapping around me, like hands I couldn't see. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected to hear that whisper again, or worse, see something. I kept the lights on. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. My heart was racing, and every time I thought I heard the softest noise, my eyes snapped open. Then, at exactly 3:03 a.m., I heard it. A knock. Just one. Soft. Slow. It came from the door. I lay still in bed, my pulse thumping in my ears. I could hardly breathe. Who could be knocking at this hour? I hadn't had visitors in days. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the wind, or maybe some weird creak in the building. But then it came again. Another knock, this time louder, more insistent. I got up from the bed, moving slowly, trying to steady my breath. The hallway was pitch black, and I knew better than to open the door without knowing who was on the other side. But the knocking didn't stop. It just kept coming, over and over again. I glanced over at the mirror beside the door. The reflection stared back at me. But then something shifted in the reflection. I froze. My heart stopped for a second. It wasn't just me in the mirror. There was someone standing behind me. Their face was hidden in the shadows, but I could see the outline of their figure, tall and thin. The same figure that had been standing behind me in the room, just out of sight, always out of sight. I could feel them, hear them, but whenever I turned around, they were gone. Except now, they were there. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't even move. I was frozen, watching in horror as the shadowed figures seemed to grow larger, its presence slowly overtaking the reflection of the room. And then it spoke. A voice, cold and unrecognizable, came from behind me. "You opened the door." I don't remember what happened next. I couldn't. The fear in my chest overwhelmed me. It was like every muscle in my body locked up, and all I could do was stand there, staring at the figure in the mirror as it grew closer. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was still standing in front of the door. The lights were still on, but everything felt off. My heart was still pounding, and for a long moment I just stood there in a daze, unsure of what had just happened. I looked around, expecting to see some sign of the figure, some clue to what had caused that cold, rasping voice. But there was nothing. The room was silent. Forcing myself to breathe, I finally turned around, half expecting to see something I couldn't explain. But all I saw was the mirror, just my reflection staring back at me. The figure I'd seen before was gone, vanished without a trace. I wasn't sure if it had been real or if I'd just imagined it. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I staggered back to the bed and collapsed onto it, my mind racing, struggling to piece together what had been happening. My fingers brushed the sheets, and I felt something cold against my skin. My heart skipped a beat as I looked down at the bed. There they were, the feathers, but this time there were four black feathers laid out in a neat line across the middle of the bed. They weren't just random anymore. They were deliberate. There was something intentional about their placement. And then I saw it. In the middle of the feathers, something was written, scratched into the fabric of the sheets, as though someone had used their nails or some other sharp object to carve the words. "You opened the door." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The voice in the dark, the one I'd heard just before everything went black, had it been inside my apartment all along? Had it been there watching me, waiting for the moment I finally gave in and opened that door? I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. The air was thick, like it was holding its breath, just waiting for me to make the wrong move. I wasn't sure what was happening anymore, but I knew one thing. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. I grabbed my phone again, but this time I didn't text Matt. I didn't want to drag him into this anymore. I had to figure it out on my own. I couldn't keep running. I walked to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The knocking had stopped. The voice had stopped. But there was still something there, something lurking in the corners of my mind. It was like I was being pulled toward it, unable to break free. I threw open the door. Nothing. Just the empty hallway outside. I stepped into the hallway, my feet making no sound on the floor. The building was unnervingly quiet. No one was here. Not even the hum of distant voices or footsteps from the other apartments. The silence felt suffocating. But then I heard it again. The whisper. This time it was clearer, sharper. The voice came from somewhere deep within the building, somewhere I couldn't quite place. It wasn't a whisper anymore, but a low, growling murmur. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. It's time. I didn't want to follow it. I didn't want to find out where it was coming from. But somehow I couldn't resist. Every step I took seemed to pull me closer, like I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. I turned a corner, then another. The hallways stretched on and on, growing darker with each step. It was like I was walking deeper into the building, but it felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. The walls seemed to close in, and the air felt heavier, colder. I was no longer in my apartment building. It felt like I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. At the end of the hall, I saw it. A door. A new one. It wasn't supposed to be there. I knew it wasn't. The building didn't have any doors at the end of this hall. There had never been anything but walls. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath shallow. The door was old, weathered. Its wood was scratched and scuffed, as though it had been there for years. The whispering grew louder as I reached for the handle. It's time. I didn't want to open it. I knew deep down that I shouldn't. But my hand reached for the knob anyway, my fingers closing around it. The moment I turned the handle, the door creaked open. Inside, the room was dark. I could barely see anything, but there was a shape in the center, something that was moving. And then I realized there was something else in the room. A figure. A tall, thin figure with dark wings, its outline barely visible in the dim light. The moment I stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind me. I tried to move, tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen, trapped in that cold, suffocating air. And then I heard it again. The whisper, "You shouldn't have opened the door." The wings flapped, a sound that echoed through the room, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. It was like I was being consumed by the darkness, the presence of something ancient and hungry. I had opened the door, and now it was too late.